part of the Press Play Podcast Network.
Iguodala to Curry, back to Iguodala, up for the layup. Oh, blocked by James. It's over. It's over. Cleveland is a city of champions once again. The Cavaliers are NBA champions.
Oh man, those memories of that Cavs 2016 team still fresh in our minds now 5 years later. Sam, does that ever get old? Listen to those highlights.
It doesn't. It's still, I think most Cavs fans will be able to listen to that forever and probably watch the final. At least I know every once in a while I'll go back and watch those final 2 minutes of that game on YouTube when I'm just looking to kill some time.
Absolutely.
I don't think it'll ever get old. No.
I agree. It's never going to get old. Well, welcome here to Cavs on the Break NBA podcast. I'm your host, John Sabol, alongside Sam Amico, NBA writer for hoopswire.com. You know, I'm still kind of new to this podcast, but every time I hear the intro music and the intro highlights, you know, we just kind of touched on that a little bit there, but then the music itself is the NBA Jam music. Were you an NBA Jam video game player guy, Sam?
I was. I did NBA Jam, and then I did, then I moved advanced, obviously, to 2K.
Mm-hmm.
And then my older boys continued to just crush me no matter who I picked. And by halftime of NBA 2K games, I would, put down the controller, walk away frustrated. And one of the boys, told my wife that we don't want dad to play anymore because he just ends up getting mad and we get in trouble. So those my NBA video game days are now over. But yes, I did start off with NBA Jam.
Yeah, I did too. Actually, I started out before that. Was in Super Tecmo Basketball for Super Nintendo.
I do remember that. I don't know if I played it, but I do remember that. I played obviously a lot of Tecmo football.
Tecmo football was the way better game, obviously, and Bo Jackson. We can talk video games all day long.
Oh, Bo Jackson, yeah, you couldn't stop him.
You couldn't stop Bo Jackson, and then who was it? Michael Singletary was the best on the Bears. Defense was phenomenal.
Yeah.
Oh man, such a good, and the 49ers were good too. You had the Montana, I think it was Montana and Jerry Rice.
Yeah.
The Browns were so in those games, but
yeah. But you pick them all the time anyways.
You have to, right? You have to be us Cleveland kids, right?
Yeah.
Well, I had to actually ask you that because this is the second time I've been on this podcast here since the Cavs season started, and I've been wanting to ask you about the NBA Jam, music and what your relationship was like with that game. It was for me. I remember playing that game a lot with my brother, and it always brings back memories. And they brought the game back now in those one arcade up games that you can buy at like Costco or Sam's Club, and man, my wife won't let me buy one because I don't have the room for it yet. One of these days, I'm going to surprise her with it and might get kicked out. I'll just call you to come over. We can play with it. But,
we can play that while we're living at the YMCA.
Yeah, we'll go throw it in the garage. Well, for those who don't know, I am a sports anchor reporter down here in Tampa, Florida. I'm a Cleveland native, big Cavs fan. I am also a podcast host right here on the Press Play Podcast Network. My brother, Scott Sabol, who, if that name sounds familiar to any of you out there listening, he's a meteorologist on Fox 8. He and I have a podcast on the network, Sabol Brothers on the Baseline, where we talk all Cleveland sports all the time. Shameless plug here, but I gotta mention our latest podcast with the former Cavs legend. Can we label him a legend? Maybe not a legend, but all-star for sure. And Sean Kemp was our latest episode, so go check that out. I don't know. Would you label him a Cavs legend? I don't think so. Just keep it, all-star? He's a Sonics legend, but
he's definitely an NBA legend.
Legend, yeah.
I think that his first year here in Cleveland was one of the best single seasons in Cavs history for an individual. He was fantastic. His second year, not so much, but that first year, I don't know. So one season legend in Cleveland. I think you could label him, but that podcast, I'm looking forward to listening to that. Really like those Cavs teams when he was here, and Mike Fratello and all that. And I think it was Kemp's first season. It was him and four rookies, and they went to the playoffs.
They did, and they got they got bounced in 5 games back when the first round was best of 5.
Yeah.
Or I'm sorry, they got bounced in 4 games to
Was it
Indiana
maybe?
Mhm.
Yeah. Well, they had a nice the Cavs had a nice run that year. They started Kemp and then 4 rookies around him, and it was a great run. And it's really cool that you got him on the pod. So that'll be a great listen.
Yeah, had to throw that shameless plug in there. But any Cavs fan listening to this podcast will love that, because we talk all Cavs and Sonics in early 90s basketball. He had some good Jordan stories in there. We talk about NBA Jam, coincidentally. And
how can you not?
How can you not? We talk a lot about that stuff too. And he had some his first year All-Star year, his first year with the Cavs, and then everything fell apart after that lockout season. But believe it or not, though, that lockout season, they only played 50 games. Statistically, in terms of Sean Kemp's points per game, he had the most points per game in 50 games in that lockout season in the second year with the Cavs than he ever had in his in 8 years in Seattle. Can you believe that? 20 and a half points per game. Isn't that nuts?
Yeah.
So,
how many was it?
20 and a half.
That's pretty remarkable. Yeah. He was a player in his prime. My goodness.
He revolutionized the power forward position, if you think about it. And we talked a lot about that too. So we went old school too. So go check that out if you can on the Sabol Brothers and the Baseline podcast right here on the Press Play Podcast Network. All right, now how about let's go back to our podcast here, Cavs on the Break, an NBA podcast. Sam, last time you and I talked a few weeks back was before the Cavs the current Cavaliers embarked on that road trip out west. And you and I were pretty bullish on what was going to happen there. And boy, were we wrong. 3-2 on that West Coast trip. That was incredible for a young team like that. Proved us all wrong, played some great playoff teams, played the Lakers, and, really just, played some decent basketball, had some, losses, those 2 losses in Phoenix and against the Lakers, but those were competitive games. Cavs held up with the Lakers and were leading for most of that game until the fourth quarter when LeBron and company took over. So before we kind of go into the recent game, which was against Portland at home where the Cavs won, your reaction on that 3-2 West Coast trip?
I was stunned, and not only because they finished 3-2, but like you'd mentioned, if it wasn't for that last 6 minutes of the Lakers game, that kind of got away from them. The Lakers just basically took over, and that's what veteran teams with LeBron do. So that was far from a bad loss. They didn't look bad in that game. They had moments in the Phoenix game where they looked bad. But again, you're talking about a team that went to the NBA Finals last season, playing them on their floor, and then you make a run late. I thought it was a smashing success, and then you have to, you beat Denver. You start off on the trip, beat Denver. When they did that, I thought, okay, they're going to finish 1-4 on the trip, so not terrible.
I thought the same thing.
and then they beat the Clippers, and I just kind of thought, okay, they're starting to play with confidence. And then when they played the Lakers, as tight as they did, I think that game was tied at halftime, and all the way up until like 6.5 minute mark, that game was still up for grabs, which to me was said a lot, almost more than their win in Denver or against the Clippers. And then you went to Phoenix. You had a bad night, what you're going to do, the next night after having to play the Lakers in Phoenix. But I thought they fought, and they did some good things, and they didn't just mail it in when they got down big in Phoenix. So I thought that was okay. And then you got to fly all the way across the country, face a Hornets team that was on their court that was pretty hot at the time, and then you go in there and beat them. I just think, they're doing so much right in terms of just their belief in what they're doing, their belief in that they can go out and win games, and the confidence level is high when they're playing the right way, which they've done, and which is a lot different than we saw last season when they would be in these kind of games, and then all of a sudden it would get away from them. You could tell they just didn't believe they could they could pull it out. Now they have that belief, and obviously it's for a variety of reasons, but the fact that they're a confident team now, you just hope that they can sustain that, because if they can sustain that, win or lose, they're going to be a lot of fun to watch.
Yeah, that Hornets game surprised me because, first off, it's a scheduling snafu, if you will. You're going to play on the West Coast and you have an East Coast game before you come home. To me, that felt like the ultimate trap game, if you will, in terms of just you're coming off such a high and you're going back to the East Coast. You got the time change. I mean, it was 2 days later after the Suns game, but still, I thought they were going to lose that game. But no, it was close. They won by 3, but and then they came home and then they beat the Blazers. And we'll touch on that in a second. But I think the biggest thing that surprised me was in these close games against these competitive perennial playoff teams, Denver, both LA teams, and of course, Phoenix, you have such a young Cavaliers team. And then there's going to be growing pains. We all know it. And we're still going to hit on some. There's going to be a lot of issues with this team going forward, just in terms of those growing pains, things they're going to work on. But you didn't see them buckle under the pressure in a lot of ways. Yes, the Lakers pulled away, but those are the Lakers, and that's with LeBron. That's going to happen. Yeah. You can't be upset about that. But just the way that they played, there was never, in terms of the body language, just watching it on TV, there was never a sense of this team just kind of going through the motions. There was never a sense that the stage was too big for them. I mean, they were playing with a level of confidence that we haven't seen in a while. And I know they're 5-4 now, and they were 5-4 last year at this time through 9 games. But Sam, this has a completely different feel to it. I'm not saying the Cavs are going to go ahead and stay hot and maybe go to the playoffs. I hope that happens. But there is something different about this young nucleus of this team, and the way that they're playing. Call it moxie, call it a newfound confidence, call it this chemistry. Is it the Mobley factor? Whatever it is, it's there, and you can't deny it.
Yeah, well, they went 5-4 last year, but if you look at it, they didn't have Jared Allen at that point. Obviously, they didn't have Markkanen, and they didn't have Mobley. So those are your 3 7-footers. And then you throw out 2 6'1" guards. Now, you and I might have talked about this a little bit, like, well, that's not the way the NBA is going.
Right.
The NBA is 6'6", 6'8" guys that can shoot from the perimeter, that, can light it up from the perimeter. Well, the Cavs have managed to turn this unconventional, unique lineup to their advantage, and you're not going to score at the rim on them real easily. I like how the big guys are going out to defend the perimeter, and they're hard to guard now. They've made that lineup difficult to guard. And then, when healthy, you're bringing in Kevin Love and Ricky Rubio off the bench. And usually there's kind of that 8th guy. One time it was Lamar Stevens. Another time it was Chetty, and
a little bit Dean Wade, a little bit in some.
Well, you're right. I was going to say you had Dean Wade starting the other night, so now you got Windler got some time because of the Markin and Liver out. Jay managed to keep these guys. First of all, they have his voice, or his Bickerstaff has the players' admiration. He has the respect, and what he's installed is when players see that this is working, then they trust the coach, and those are 3 huge things. And he's very level-headed. He's very even keel. He'll get on guys if he has to, but for the most part, he's pretty even keel. He's pretty much like, don't worry about it. If something goes wrong, we got this. And he's done a magnificent job. But all those things combined have just really given them kind of a new. So yes, it is different than 5-4 last year, because 5-4 last year came with the Andre Drummond thing hanging over your head.
Yeah.
Kevin Porter Jr. hanging over your head. You didn't know what happened with him. Now all of a sudden, those things are gone. Everybody kind of knows what their role is as long as they're healthy. And I just think there's a lot of fluidity and a lot of organization of what they're doing. And Garland and Sexton another year older. Jared Allen's another year older. And, Markkanen's been a little bit up and down, but I think he's mostly what they expected. Mm-hmm. And then Mobley has been, to me, where am I old enough to have seen Garnett's rookie and sophomore years? Mm-hmm. And while Mobley's not that kind of fiery guy, he's a more quiet, even keel guy. He's making a similar impact, and his ability to defend not only at the rim but on the perimeter, and what he can do with the basketball in terms of, we know, he's not going to force shots, but he can also pass. I just think that they, take him off this team. This team is not 5-4. He's
100%.
A huge adjustment and or advantage for them. And boy, it looks great right now. Look, it sure does. It looks a lot of fun. And hey, veteran teams, John, would kill to go out on the West Coast, come back, play Charlotte, then come back and play that home game and emerge from those 6 games with a 4-2 record.
Yeah.
The Los Angeles Lakers would kill for that, to go out on the East Coast and do the same thing. So the fact that they're 5-4 and their schedule has already been very difficult is what makes this year, to me, different than last.
Absolutely. And you know what? I don't remember. We can go back and look at it or look it up, but I don't remember or recall in LeBron's second tenure, those 4 years, the Cavs going on the West Coast and having that much success against teams that had that level of perennial playoffs. Because there was always a couple games on that West Coast trip during those years, because you had some random injuries with Kyrie or Love or LeBron, maybe taking a day off, not playing, where the Cavs just either, I don't want to say wet the bed, but I mean, they lost a game they shouldn't have lost. And they were okay to do that because they were, playing and saving themselves for the playoffs. So it's a little different. I'm not trying to compare it, but my point is, to see a team do this, and to your point, Sam, is very rare to come out of like that, out of a West Coast trip, East Coast team, and for it to come with a really young team just goes to show how important and critical and also impressive. So, the other thing too, you talk about Mobley.
Well, they're young, they're hungry. I was just going to say they're young and hungry, and that plays a big role in all this. And they hear what people like me and you and others who doubted them. They hear that, they hear the doubts, and that they use that as fuel. And when you're a young team like that, sometimes you go out there, you don't know any better. It's like, we're not supposed to win, so whatever. And they've really used all that to their advantage.
And I think the 2 biggest changes right now with this team, as you compare the ones from last year, you touched on a lot of it, but, I think obviously the Mobley impact is phenomenal. This kid is on rookie of the year type status or start so far. I mean, his play, maybe his stats may not be there, but depending what the rest of the field would be, but still, I mean, the kid's averaging, 13 and 8 a game through 9 games. And, he has taken over some of those games too, in certain possessions. His wingspan, we talked about it in previous episodes. His wingspan's phenomenal. He glides like a deer on the court, but he's athletic. He could shoot the 3. Came up with a big 3 against Portland. Well, again, we'll talk about the Blazers game in a moment here, but his play for a guy who is a rookie, who is so young at 20 years old, doesn't turn 21 till June, he's not afraid of the stage. And you can come back to what you just said. You're young, you don't know any better. And Bickerstaff and the coaching staff needs to get a lot of credit for mentoring him a little bit here and helping him go through some of these intimidating games as a as a rookie rather. The other issue to me other positive or difference is the impact of Ricky Rubio and what he's been able to do on the court and also helping Sexton and Garland. So I think that has alleviated a lot of pressure from those 2 guards, but also has made, Mobley's position and his play a little easier too. I mean, Rubio has done that, and he's played really, really well. Surprisingly, I shouldn't say surprisingly, but it's encouraging because you knew what you're going to get from him. But what I wasn't sure what you were going to get from him is the type of leadership. I mean, you always hear that he's going to be a leader and he's a vet, but I wanted to see what he was going to do with these two young guards. And then you add Mobley in the mix, and he's exceeded my expectations. And I know many others' expectations as well.
Yeah, I think when the Cavs made that trade, people were like, well, why are they going out and get Ricky Rubio? He's an, average starter. Didn't seem to make a lot of sense at the time, even though the Cavs, they just gave up Taurean Prince for him. It wasn't like it was a huge deal, but a lot of people were like, well, we have Sexton and Garland. What do we need Rubio for? But now we hear Sexton and Garland talk about him. Garland has offered him tons of praise. Sexton said, admitted things can get a little wild out there sometimes with, two younger guards. And then Rubio comes in and he calms us down. And he's obviously a different type of player, a much better player, but kind of the role you were hoping for from Matthew Dellavedova. Now he had nothing left in terms of NBA. He sacrificed his body so much, but Rubio does, and Rubio does keep things calm, and hit some huge shots against the Lakers, and very, very underrated. And in terms of this team's ascension, has played a major role, and it'll be interesting to me to see with him in the last year of his deal here what will become of him. But I think much of that will be based on how the Cavs do from here on out.
Right. And you know what? You can't trade him till December, right? What is it?
December 15th.
I was going to say that. Yeah. I know people listening to this are going to be like, why are you, John and Sam, going no doom and gloom on us now? Well, I don't mean to go there. I'm just saying in terms of, previous plans. I mean, sometimes they make these moves for, a sign like a Rubio to maybe trade him at the deadline or later on. Now we're far from that. We're not going to speculate on that yet. I mean, we've done some of that in previous episodes, but the Cavs have done extremely well so far, and we're going to continue to ride the positive train here for a little bit. Before we take a break, Sam, let's talk about that Portland game, because that was a shocker to me as well. And a couple things that stood out for me. One, the last few minutes of that game, Cavs were in control for a lot of that, and they still were to the last few minutes of that game, a game that they would have lost in years past. And Lillard started to get a little, started to heat up a little bit, had a quiet 26 on the night. You had guys that stepped up big there. Mobley hit a big three. He had a big block on Lillard in the final, minute and a half when he went to the went up for a layup. Yeah. And then, of course, the final play of the game, Jared Allen stepping out, doing his Kevin Love on Steph Curry in Game 7 impersonation of throwing a big man out there and trying to guard a guard. And he almost blocked that attempted three. And there's a good chance if you put anybody else on him, a smaller, position player, not a 7-foot guy, he probably makes that three. I thought he was going to make it anyways, because we've seen Dame do that so many times. So a nice win, a 3-point win over Portland at home. And they did it without Markkanen, Love, and Okoro. Still impressive nonetheless, and something to build on.
Yeah, and I've been covering the NBA long enough to know I would see the Cavs go out and play well on the West Coast, whether it was the Kyrie years, before LeBron came back, or when LeBron came back, they'd go out on these West Coast trips, or any kind of trip of 3 games or more, and play well, and then come home, and they just, you kind of, okay, we're home, we can relax and breathe a little, and then they lose that game. And that happens all the time in the NBA, where these teams go out, play well on the road, and then they end up coming back home and blowing it. And the fact that the Cavs won that game against Portland was as impressive to me as that entire trip, because I've just seen it so much where veteran teams lose those little trap games there, where they come home for one game, think we're going to get this one, and then we go back out on the road, which is the situation. And again, huge plays down the stretch. I thought, Mobley's block on Lillard. Lillard was, I got you, Rook. I'm going to take you to the basket, and it's Dame time. And Mobley said, take Dame time somewhere else.
Right.
And then, the Allen defense that you referenced, the fact that those guys go out and guard guards it's just been big. And I'll tell you what, people are a little bit, we got to take this team seriously because they're throwing something at us we haven't seen. They're throwing 3 7-footers, 2 6'1" guards who can get downhill and can score the basketball. And it's a very unique look that I think is throwing a lot of, opposing coaches are trying to match up with it. It's confusing to them, but the opposing players go out and see this Cavs lineup, and it's not like anything you see in today's NBA, and it's really throwing people for a loop. And then you throw in the fact that it is, young, athletic, size, speed. They've got everything, and all we were going to wait for is for them to grow, and they've grown quickly. At least through the first 9 games, they've grown very quickly in terms of confidence and or frankly know-how when it comes to winning at the end of games.
Yeah, you usually see them, cave under that pressure and collapse, like you said. But for whatever reason, this team's playing with some phenomenal confidence right now, and they're playing well, and they're throwing those different lineups out there at teams, and they don't know what to do with them. One other thing I can be remiss to say about that game was it was good to see Dylan Windler get 21 minutes and score 13 points. This is a kid, and we haven't really talked about him, at least you and I haven't on any of these episodes on the podcast, Sam, but he's under the microscope this year. And, I think he's up for an option this year, this offseason. Is that correct? Player option?
They picked up his player option. But I mean, he would be clearly a trade candidate if he,
right. Okay.
At this point in his career, he would be nothing more than a throw-in a trade to make the trade work. But he this is a make or break season for him in Cleveland for sure.
Right. And we need to see a lot more out of him because he's been hurt, the last few years of his career, the start of his career. So it's good to see him get some minutes. And I think, depending on other guys in the roster, once Okoro gets back from his hamstring injury, I think you'll get Windler get some more minutes, and he needs it, and we need to see it from him. And I think once as a collective, if you can get more out of him, now you're going to limit your rotations. And when you limit your rotations, it's obviously, of course, different variables will affect that, but you're going to need to see it only because of what you can do with them on the court. And if you do maybe try to upgrade this roster with a trade, if you're in a buyer's mode, you can add them into it. If you're in a seller's mode or whatever the case is. So I thought that was really good to see him score the 13 points. And I think 11 of those came in the first half, I believe. Yeah.
And he could use it, and the Cavs could use it. If he develops, he's athletic enough that, he's not going to embarrass you defensively. And they could frankly use a guy who's got some size and athleticism who can knock down threes. And he, that's how he arrived in Cleveland. He just needs to stay healthy. And if he continues to do those things in practice, he'll get his opportunity. Or frankly, if he gets the opportunity in a game, he's got to produce. And that's exactly what they're looking from him, what he gave them against the Blazers.
Real quick, before we do take a break, Sam, what are you hearing on Okoro? He's going to be out Friday, which would be tomorrow. That's the Toronto game. Is that correct?
Well, as far as we know, it sounds like with him, it's, they're just being cautious, as you always are at this time of year. And the last thing you want is for this thing to linger. So I would suspect he would be back within a week or so.
Okay.
I forget, they've got like Washington and Detroit and some of those teams coming up next week. He could potentially be back for one of those. I guess a lot of it depends on how long if anybody else gets hurt, they might speed them back. But right now there's no point to. They're playing well. So
man, hamstring injuries are tough. They're a pain, and you got to baby some of those, and especially have you ever pulled a hamstring? Have you ever pulled a hammy?
I have, and of course I'm not playing on an NBA court, but even mine lingered for about 6 months because I kept messing around on it, and
were you schooling kids at the rec and pick up basketball? Is that what was going on?
No, I did that before the hamstring injury, but that was a running, just my usual 2 to 4 mile jog that I do. That was the result of that. So I tried to go back to running again too soon, and it still bothered me for a while.
Yeah, I pulled my hamstring a couple of years ago in a so embarrassing, in a TV station's intramural softball game.
Oh,
I was playing center field. I went to dive for a ball. I went to dive, and I heard a pop, and I felt like a house of cards. And of course, I'm not wearing cleats, and the field is a cow pasture. Not really a cow pasture, but it felt like a cow pasture.
Yeah.
And man, it wasn't fun. Took about a month or so for me, at least. It was minor, but not as bad as yours. But my point of this is that they take forever to heal. I was talking to one of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers trainers a few years ago when they had Doug Martin on the team, and Doug Martin had a couple hamstring injuries, and he kept re-aggravating it in training camp and then the preseason, and then during the season he was out like a month or so. And I know football and basketball are different, but it's the same ideology. Is like when the trainer was telling me, when you're planting and you're going your lateral movement back and forth, and that's where the two sports are similar. You can re-aggravate that anywhere.
Yeah.
And football, obviously, you have an impact contact sport, so it's going to happen more frequently. But when it comes to an NBA player like that, I would imagine the same thing is the same process, the same, I don't know. You got to go the same way. You can't treatment, whatever. So it was just interesting because when you when you hear these cornerbacks in the NFL have a hamstring injury, and all these fans are like, oh, come on, just go out there and play. Well, it's like, it's easier said than done, but you can pop that so quickly, re-aggravate it. And, if the Cavs are doing, Okoro a good service here, obviously by, watching it and not rushing him back early in the season, there's no reason to, why. And that is the reason why. Hamstring injuries, man, they're a little challenge. They're not all the same. Either, it's just kind of like a high ankle.
I was going to say, a lot of them are, the severity is different and all that. And when you're talking 82 games, you're only 9 games in, so there's no sense. You want to see what this team is at the end of the year. Yeah, it's more important to just let it heal and let them come back slowly.
Yeah, like similar to like high ankle sprains. None of them are all the same. They can linger for a week or a year. So all right, let's take a break here on Cavs on the Break, an NBA podcast here on the Press Play Podcast Network. Coming up after the break, we've talked all highs right now with this current Cavs team at 5-4. Now we're going to talk about some of the lows, some of the things we need to see them work on, and then we'll mix in a few highs again. The old-fashioned compliment sandwich. We'll say something good at, and then something they need to work on, and then something they are good at again. As my teachers used to say when I would fail math in 5th grade, you need to do your multiplication tables or whatever. The old compliment sandwich. That's what Sam and I are going to do coming up after the break here as we look into the month of November and what's in store for the Cavs going forward. We'll be right back.
Hey everyone, I'm Holly Wetzel.
And I'm Jeremy Powell.
And we are your hosts of The Orange is Oranger, a Cleveland Browns podcast on the Press Play Podcast Network. We give you all the dog pound coverage that you'll need each week to get you ready for kickoff and beyond.
Don't miss our breakdowns of each week's matchups, game recaps, and any and all news out of Berea to feed your Browns appetite. As we all know, Holly, dogs got to eat.
That's right, Jeremy. Hit that subscribe button and never miss an episode of the Orange is Oranger Browns podcast on the Press Play Podcast Network.
Looking for new insights on the Cleveland sports scene with a unique side of Cleveland sports history? Then you found the perfect podcast. I'm John Sabol.
And I'm Scott Sabol, and we're hosts of the Sabol Brothers on the Baseline podcast, a podcast about Cleveland sports, but not your typical podcast about the land's sports teams. Join us as we embark on a journey of sharing a unique and historical side of Cleveland sports history with the help of some former Cleveland sports stars and other historical figures.
All right here on the Sabol Brothers on the Baseline podcast, part of the Press Play Podcast Network.
Hey, I'm Jason.
And I'm Gary, and we love ball cards.
And if you love ball cards too, good news. You just found your new favorite podcast. From breaks to grading,
And from collecting to flipping, join us on the Ball Card Show.
the sports podcast for the sports collector.
Welcome back to Cavs on the Break, an NBA podcast right here on the Press Play Podcast Network. John Sabol alongside Sam Amico. We've recapped so far many highs of the Cavaliers' first 5 and 4 start of the season, which is pretty remarkable. Now let's talk about some of the things they need to work on, and then some things that are still positives and all that good stuff. So First off, anything that we didn't touch on that we wanted to touch on in terms of the positives, or we hit everything?
I think we hit most things. Their defense has been much better consistently.
Mm-hmm.
And offensively, they've seemed to mesh is way better. Yeah, I mean, you can't really have too many complaints. They're meshing. There's not been any selfishness. There's not been any, boy, this guy's shooting too much, and I just think they've gone above and beyond what anybody expected through 9 games, especially, again, given that early schedule.
Okay, I agree. Now let's go to some of the negatives. And I'm going to throw one negative at you, and then you can take it from here. You talk about the defense. Okay, there's been more consistency there. I'm a little leery and not really confident that they can keep that type of pace up, only because of the inexperience factor. That's one thing I think to keep your eyes and ears on in terms of how this team is going to continue to play like that. Usually with young teams, you're going to have massive defensive breakdowns. Surprisingly, that hasn't happened yet. I still think you will see that at some point in time. It's only natural. It's not necessarily a really bad thing. It just happens with young teams. We saw it last year all the time. One particular stat and player that I am a little disappointed in, and I've been a president and CEO of the Darius Garland fan club. He's played okay, hasn't maybe had those breakout games, but he's turning the ball over way too many times, in his 8 games he's played, and he hasn't played in all 9 games, I don't believe.
Right. Yeah.
He's 7th in the league in turnovers so far at 29 turnovers total. I'm not a big, look at the stats or look at the overall breakdown, the numbers. And I know that's going to happen as a point guard. It could be a case, Sam, of him trying to do too much, but I would like to see him take care of the ball a little bit more so far early on. And I guess I could say I'm nitpicking a little bit because I love Darius's game, but that's the one thing I think that if we're going to talk a little negative, some of the minuses here.
Well, you're not alone. JB Bickerstaff has, brought it up, and Darius has brought it up, the turnovers. And yeah, it's something that if you're going to be the quarterback, you got to take care of the ball. Frankly, this is really this is adjustment for him and Colin. The fact that they're playing with 3 7-footers out there, that's
fair.
A little bit of an adjustment, not to make too much of an excuse for him, but I think the fact that they're playing playing pretty well in spite of that, it makes it not such a big deal. It'd be different if they were, 2-7 right now.
Sure.
But yeah, that's definitely something that they, both the guards, both Collins turning over too much too. And in Collins' case, it's definitely a situation where there are times he's trying to do too much. Now, frankly, I think that most coaches and teams would be happy that a guy's trying to do too much as opposed to a guy just kind of being out there and, settling for jumpers or whatever. So, yeah, it's definitely something that needs to improve, but it's also they just need to find a balance. Like and I think playing with Rubio, frankly, is going to help them in that area. He's somebody who every once in a while he'll make a boneheaded turnover, but by and large, he is somebody who values possessions. He's a great ball handler, and just kind of watching his rhythms. And as Sexton himself said, the guards, Sexton and Garland, can get a little bit too excitable, a little bit too wild sometimes, and then Rubio will come in the game and calm things down. And they're seeing that every day, not just in the games, but in practice, and just him being in their ear a little bit. So yeah, it's an issue, but it will be an issue if they're still doing it after 30, 35 games.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, they're still feeling their way around, and guys, when you have the basketball and you're playing with 3 7-footers that all of them are very capable of scoring themselves and getting in good position, it's moving fast. There's some confusion. So I think, yes, they need to clean it up. Is it a major issue right now? No, far from it.
Yeah, and I agree. And I'm nitpicking there. And, to be fair, Colin Sexton has, like you said, he's turned the ball over quite a bit too. Interesting stat here. When you look and compare their stats so far, and again, I'm not trying to be stacked. I'm not trying to be contradict myself here, but looking at their numbers, their turnover ratio has both increased so far this season compared to last year. And, it could be a number of things. It could be doing too much. It could be boneheaded turnovers. It could be adjusting to the new lineups and the new 7-footers on the team. All could be valid. I think the difference and I don't have the advanced numbers or metrics or the stats or the highlights or the, play-by-play to back me up, but just from the eye test, I think a lot of the turnovers that Sexton had or has had so far have come in to a situation where he's either penetrating, either getting trapped and dishing it too late, or forcing a shot too late. Whereas Darius is maybe becoming a little bit more trying to weave the ball in too tight or too close to certain guys inside, or get a little careless on the pass. I mean, whatever it is obviously they know it. It's a little baby, this much of a concern going forward. They're aware of it, and I think they'll definitely work on it and get better on it. But if this is, game 32 and we're still having this conversation, I think then that's a bigger problem than it is right now. Again, I'm nitpicking. I love both of those guys' games. I'm more of I like Darius's game just a little bit better. But I think, both guys have done tremendous play so far. They've been really good in terms of adjusting to this lineup, and you can tell there's some chemistry building between those two. Finally, at least it seems like it through the first 9 games, and we'll see where this goes in terms of the entire totality of the team and those two players. Anything else that you can see in terms of you want to nitpick or some minuses on this team so far? And we talked about the defense. We just talked about the turnovers. Maybe Markkanen his numbers have been okay. Again, that's nitpicking. But that's what we knew we were going to get. He's a little streaky of a player.
Yeah.
Are you shocked how low Kevin Love's numbers are? Honestly, I'm not. Are you?
No, I'm really not, considering what his role is,
off the bench.
Yeah, he's not, he's really not making shots. He's not taking a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Every once in a while, there'll be like a 5-minute spurt. Well, in Denver, it was longer than 5 minutes, but every once in a while, there'll be like a 5-minute spurt during the game where it's like, there goes. He still has that nose for the basketball, and you'll see the old Kevin Love come out.
Mm-hmm.
But no, I'm not surprised. Frankly, he's not really a fit anymore, but the fact that he's doing what he's doing off the bench, which is going and getting the basketball off the glass, and he's struggling to make shots, frankly. But I'm really just kind of searching for a negative where I really don't see a whole lot.
Which is good. That's a good thing, Sam.
We're
nitpicking on 2 little things there, or 3 or whatever, and which just goes to show when this team's 5-4, there's not much really to complain about when the issues that are maybe hurting them are expected because they're so young. But the other positives are endless. There's way more positives with this team 9 games in than I thought we'd ever see. And again, I'm not trying to, be redundant.
Well, they didn't play that great the first 2 games either.
That's true. That's true.
And that to me makes this 5-4 even more impressive, because after those first 2 games, I was kind of like, oh boy, and now they're going to go out on the West Coast. Good luck. But they found themselves there.
The loss to Memphis and then Charlotte and then the Atlanta win, which was the 3rd game there, the first one of the season.
Yeah, which I thought Atlanta's due to lose. I didn't put much stock in that.
Right.
But looking back on it now, that was impressive as well, because that kind of kicked off this whole thing. So at the time, I was just kind of like, you beat Atlanta at home, they're going to lose some games, big deal. But just the way they played on the West Coast really, makes it seem like, hey, you know what, that Atlanta game, we should put some stock in that, because that kind of was the start of things. And I think a big part of the problem, maybe part of our issues, was we watched them during the preseason and they looked terrible.
Sure, they did. They didn't look good. They did not. No.
And I'm like, oh boy, this is going to be bad. And they just found themselves. The question, John, really for me moving forward, and I think anybody who has perspectives and has watched this game long enough, is what's going to happen when the wheels start to come off a little bit. They're going to at some point. They did with LeBron's teams. They're going to, they, with the exception of the 73-9 Warriors, every NBA team has the wheels come off during the regular season at some point.
Yeah.
How do you manage that? Are you going to be pointing fingers? How does a young team deal with that? Right now, I would have great faith in them being able to deal with it, because of the way that they've approached every night and every game, and kept things, kind of in their circle. And I've just been wildly, not only surprised, but wildly impressed with the way this team has gotten off to this start. And I know the John Beeline team started 4-5 and looked good. I know last year, I think they were 3-0 and 5-4 and looked okay, but both those teams had some stuff hanging over them, and now this team doesn't. This is the team that they're going to keep unless something should go wrong.
Yeah, and those rosters of those 2 teams were a little flawed too, and that Beeline team, and of course last year with the Drummond and Kevin Porter Jr. Yeah, I completely agree with you. If there's an issue when they have to roll off 3 straight losses, how are they going to rebound? And I would like to see, how, and I don't know how we're going to know this for sure, but anything gets leaked out, or if we hear anything, or maybe not necessarily leaked out, but maybe you hear some of the younger guys talk about what the veterans of a Love and even a Marketing in a Rubio or anybody else doing in that locker room to help these guys get over the hump in a way. That's going to be a good little storyline going forward. Yeah. Once you do hit that little rough stretch. And you're right, every team, no matter who you are, has those rough stretches. Real quick, before we wrap this up, this latest episode up, I'm looking at the month of November here and the schedule wise. And, there's some balance here where they can get some wins. And then there's still some tough games there. You're at Brooklyn one night. And now I'm just not going in order here, but you have your Toronto Friday here tomorrow. But then after that, you got some winnable games. But then you have the Brooklyn, you play the Warriors, you play Brooklyn again. You have a 3 stretch there on November 17th, 18th, and the 22nd when you're at Brooklyn, and then you're home to the Golden State and then Brooklyn again. So there's 3 straight games right there. That on the calendar, to me, is going to be a really, really intriguing situation in terms of how this team is going to be if you lose 1 or lose 2 or lose all 3. And then after that, you've got Phoenix at home 3 days later.
Yeah.
And then you got Orlando, which gets favorable. And then, of course, Dallas and Miami. And then, of course, I passed a lot of those other games there on that schedule of some favorable other games on there. But my point is, to your point, you're going to get a rough patch. We thought it was going to be that road trip here to the start of the season. Hasn't happened yet. You may get it here later in the month. And it's not about to hit the panic button. It's about recalibrating and see what you can do to grow.
Yeah. Well, and first of all, let me deal with the schedule. Toronto has been playing extremely well. So playing up at their place, that's never easy anyway. But the fact that they've been playing real well right now, they just went into Washington, who had been playing real well, and beat them the other night. So that's a tough game right there. And then when do they play Washington? They've got Washington coming up. It's like early next week, isn't it?
November 10th. Yeah. Wednesday, the 10th. Yeah.
So, yeah. And don't they go there, or is that at home?
That's at home. So you got Toronto tomorrow, then at New York, home to Washington.
Which is no easy game at New York.
Right. Detroit. And then you got a weird not even a home and home. It's a home game and a home game with Boston. Another weird scheduling fluke there, where you're at home against the Celtics on Saturday the 13th, and then home against the Celtics again on the 15th. Usually when you play back-to-backs, you're doing a home and home. This one,
home and road,
this is a weird schedule this year. So, but Boston's always tough.
Washington's playing well. They've got a nice veteran team all of a sudden with Kuzma and Harrell and Spencer Dinwiddie and Beal and some of those other guys. So Washington's got a pretty formidable team, it seems like, or at least on paper, and they played well early. So I look at it this way: when you're the Cavs and every one of your starters, is between the ages of 20 and 24. Right. Every night is a challenge, because you've got every team's probably going to be 90% of the teams in the league are going to have more experience than you in their starting line. And that's always a challenge, because you never know with youth in pro sports. It's always going to be wildly inconsistent. And to me, when I look at them and I look at the schedule, I'm like, the way they've played right now, I can't predict what they're going to do, because you usually predict they're going to lose, and they haven't been doing a lot of that. So it's hard to tell. I just think what's important for them is to maintain this level of confidence and competitiveness. If they stay competitive, really, they're going to be able to steal some games they aren't supposed to win. They'll be able to steal some of those for sure. We've seen that already.
So I didn't scroll down the schedule enough to see where those favorable wins would be, or favorable teams. Yeah. And I thought there was some there. I looked too far down in December, because in November is actually pretty tough, because you've got 12 teams remaining, including the Toronto game tomorrow, Friday. Out of the 12 teams, only 3 of them missed the playoffs last year. Toronto.
Yeah, sure.
But Toronto's always tough at home, and they're
playing
better. They're playing great ball. New York. Actually, no, New York made the playoffs last year. I'm sorry. Washington, as you alluded to, they're playing great
Detroit.
ball. And Detroit. And actually, no, for Orlando. So there's some hard games coming up here on paper. But hey, they've proved us wrong already. And it's December gets much favorable. That's what I was looking at. I had the wrong month. December's schedule gets a lot more favorable. So still, it's good to be a Cavalier right now, as we look here, as we record this on November 5th. And we'll see where this goes, Sam, because it's going to be really intriguing when you get a young team that doesn't know any better playing against some better teams on paper that are more experienced, with more veterans, more all-stars, more future Hall of Famers. And you gotta love to see what's going to happen and how they react and how it goes down.
I love the lineup. I do. I actually like how JB Bickerstaff started Dean Wade, because he has some size to fill in for Markkanen. It was really like, we're not going to start Chetty, because that would be veering too far from what we do. So let's start Dean Wade, because we like throwing out, although Dean's not 7 foot, we like throwing out 3 big guys next to our guards. I just, the fact that what they're doing is working makes it so interesting. And you know what? Just keep doing what you're doing. Try to stay as healthy as you can, which right now is obviously already an issue with Markkanen and Love and the protocols, and Okoro having the hamstring issue. But keep doing what you're doing with your main guys, with Mobley, Allen, Sexton, Garland. Those four can stay on the floor for 85, 90% of the games, and they continue to do what they're doing. They're going to be fun, and not only fun, but going somewhere. Maybe, I don't know what that means in terms of a timeline, but they'll be going somewhere, and that's what you want to see. The last 2 years, I thought, well, this team's not going anywhere. Not only are they not winning games and looking bad, but what's the plan? Well, Mobley has made that plan easier, I think. And the fact that the Cavs, credit to the front office and credit to JB Bickerstaff, they're saying we're going to go about this differently than everybody else is having success. Yeah. And guess what? We're going to see if this works, and we feel like we like our chances. And right now, you can't blame them. They do like their chances, and it's they've been playing that the players have backed it up with their play. So I just think it's been great so far.
One last thing before we close this. I love LeBron, what he said after that game against Cavs in LA there about Mobley, when he said the Cavs got a good one in him.
Yeah.
But he also mentioned, make you feel really old, was that Bronny Jr. played against Mobley, 2 or 3 years ago?
Yeah. That's that.
Yeah,
thanks,
yeah, exactly. You got to wonder how he feels about that. So that was a fun little moment right there for him and for Evan Mobley and the Cavs. So, all right, well, that will do on this edition of Cavs on the Break NBA podcast. Let's throw out your how people can get in touch with you, Sam, at your Twitter at Amico Hoops.
And Twitter's at Amico Hoops, and can read me at hoopswire.com. And I generally post 8 or 9 things there a day.
Only 8 or 9, Sam? Come on now. What's going on with 10?
Once we get closer to the trade deadline, I remember last year's trade deadline, I think we had 37 posts.
Oh, wow.
On one day. So it was a crazy trade deadline. But we'll pick up the pace. We're a veteran team, so we're kind of taking it easy at this part of the season. And then once things start to heat up, we'll pick up the pace. So and by veteran, I mean I'm super old. So
well, if LeBron didn't make you old, you just made yourself old, I guess, right?
Right. Yeah. It's pretty sad when you're saying guys are, washed up or over the hill, and then you look and you see they're a decade younger than you. That's when maybe I'm the old washed up one.
You got to protect that hamstring, right?
That's exactly it. Just going from the chair to the fridge.
There you go. Well, go check out Sam at Amico Hoops on Twitter, and of course at hoopswire.com. You can get in touch with us here on this podcast at Cavs on the Break on Twitter, and you can get in touch with me at John_Sabol on Twitter as well. And remember, if you haven't already, please subscribe to the podcast, Cavs on the Break NBA podcast, on Spotify, Apple, and wherever else you listen to your podcast. So a tradition unlike any other, Sam, as the man, the myth, the legend, Chase Smith would say, we're going to end this podcast the only way we know how. Mike Breen, take us out.
Congratulations, Cleveland. Your decades-long wait is finally over. The Cavaliers are NBA champions.